Viewer contributions make local programming possible on WNIN. Become a member of WNIN with your contribution so we can continue to make this programming available. Visit WNIN.org and click on the donate button.
Well, welcome back. It's February, time for our big show, and we got both guys here. Patrick's back.
It is great.
In full form.
It is great to be here, Your Honor, although in January you proved you could do it without me. Kind of hurts. You had Diane rhymes with lion and Dr. Hanka Burnin' Love from USI and talked all things political, and I was absolutely gratified to see that neither one of them in that show predicted that Cheryl Musgrave will win the next election.
Or that
they have progressed.
Or that the Chiefs would win the Super Bowl.
Or that the Chiefs, boy, how about that? That
fly, Eagles fly, huh?
We call that on regular television an old-fashioned butt whooping is what the Chiefs got.
Typical Super Bowl Sunday, a lot of eating, a lot of drinking.
Eating, drinking. You know, the holiday season now goes from Thanksgiving to the Super Bowl, and I have my normal fourth quarter 10 pounds to work on now that all of the holiday season is over, but hope you've been well.
Been great. We got a lot to talk about.
Well, we do. There's a few things going on. We have a clown in the Oval Office. We have a governor that wants to gut funding for schools and local government. Other than that, I don't think there's a thing to talk about.
You know, I read an article in the Indianapolis Star over the weekend in regards to tax reform, property tax reform, and the impact upon local communities. And the headline was, Lieutenant Governor and Governor want to kill Carmel.
Well, there's going to be a lot more of that. I think the mayor of our fair city had a press conference today with representatives of city government, county government, the schools, all present to talk about the effects that have not been thought through of Senate Bill 1. But let's start nationally.
Go ahead.
Let me ask you, as a member of the third branch of government, how you feel about recent statements emanating from the Trump White House, as high as the vice president, and the president himself overnight in one of his tweets, that maybe if these judges are going to try to stop some of these executive orders, that maybe it's time that we disregard them. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think I said this before in one of our last shows of last year. It's going to be the courts that are going to keep this government together, given the makeup of our legislative and executive branch as it stands now. I think the courts are going to have to be tough.
It was Andrew Jackson that said, really? That's what they ruled? Let's see them try to enforce it. I'm afraid. I'm just here to tell you. It appears to me there's no guardrails. The Supreme Court handed him immunity broader than anybody ever imagined. So let's just assume that one of the federal judges, they've enjoined this gutting of USAID or telling people their job is gone or firing members of the FBI and the Justice Department. And judges have stepped in and said, wait, let's slow down. And they've said, you know what? You don't have a right to interfere with us. We're the executive branch.
Well, back on the immunity issue, I think the problem with that decision was it came up to the Supreme Court a little premature. There's not really a factual basis to support that decision. And I don't think the immunity decision has been grafted into the law yet completely. But the courts still are going to be the stalwart to make sure that court orders are followed, the Constitution is adhered to, and if it takes a very active Supreme Court to do that, so be it.
But you and I both know, in the way that little book tells us, in that beautiful document is full of checks and balances between the branches. The check and balance, of course, on the courts is supposed to be funding and the fact that judges are appointed by this branch.
Correct.
But enforcement of judicial orders depends upon the executive branch.
Correct.
And if the executive branch says, nah, 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 boo, boo, and the Senate right now is in rubber stamp mode in Washington, what happens? It's a constitutional crisis.
It
That's
is,
what
it is a
happens.
potential constitutional crisis, but that's assuming the highest court in this land doesn't do their job. And I have confidence the high court will do its job.
And if it rules, it can be ignored if the executive branch doesn't enforce a Supreme Court decision.
Well, I tend to be a little more optimistic than you, Patrick. I think there are cooler heads, more learned heads in Congress that will realize you can only go so far. Right now, there's a lot of trial balloons being floated out there by this administration, but they only can go so far when the real checks and balances kick in.
I hope so. But I got to tell you, I've had a lot of respect for the seeming independence from time to time for our Senator Todd Young. The new person will be not only a rubber stamp, he'll be rubber tire tracks on the road. He'll lay down in front of Trump, whatever his Banks or whatever his.
Jim Banks, yeah.
He'll be ridiculous. Todd Young, a veteran, has shown streaks of independence. He co-authored the bill that's building the chip factory up there in Lebanon right now.
Right. He's
He's worked across the aisle. I had great hopes for his future until he appeared to have a big problem, sort of with Hegseth, but he got over that one. But then he was going to have a real big problem with Tulsi Gabbard.
Well,
And now, okay, well, he voted her out of committee. Is he afraid of being primary?
he had some meetings with the president. He came to some understandings,
I hope he had all his shots.
and they came to some understandings of how her authority would be checked. I don't think you can evaluate the commitment by Todd Young to the rule of law just based upon his one vote. I think he is a true believer. I think he'll do the right thing. He's shown that in the past. He has broken with Trump in the past, and he'll do that in the future when necessary.
Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the FBI person. Who is that again?
Patel.
Kash Patel. I mean, any person of any independence cannot, in good conscience, vote for them based upon their resume, based upon things they have said. So you can tell me all you want, but if Todd Young can vote for those three appointments, all that tells me, and should tell all of you voters in this state of Indiana, whether it matters or not, is that he fears being primaried by somebody to his right flank. That's all that's about. They all bend a knee and kiss the ring.
Could be, but here's the thing you got to keep in mind. We need to keep Todd Young there. Things need to be practical. This president's out in 4 years.
Well, he talks every now and then about another term.
Oh, I think he understands. He's out in 4 years.
I hope he remembers that. I had hopes for Todd Young. He worked well, helped smooth the Brookman appointment to the federal bench. I mean, didn't play any games with that. Has worked across the aisle, but he's making me rethink all of that.
It's a little bit different when you're looking at cabinet positions. You want to be a little bit deferential to the president. I understand that. But going forward, it's a new ball game.
So how do you feel about the DOGE, Department of Governmental whatever, and
Efficiency.
Elon Musk?
Well, there's two things to look at. First of all, what Elon Musk is attempting to do on behalf of the federal government is a good thing. The question is he doing it properly and constitutionally? That's another thing. But one thing that really smacked me right in the forehead was this deal they put out to federal employees, all federal employees. We'll keep you on full pay till the end of September if you agreed to resign now. 60,000 people took advantage of that. You know what that 60,000 represents in terms of percentage of the federal payroll?
Small,
2%. So there is some bloat out there.
no question.
But how they're going about it is a different thing.
Well, I don't think, as much as these parties want to talk about waste and efficiency, the fact is we're a country of 350 million people. You could not run this country or govern this country without the administrative state. You can call it all the names you want to call it, but you need somebody processing Social Security checks. You need somebody taking environmental complaints. You need somebody testing whether the bacon will give people disease. There is a place for the administrative state. And just to willy-nilly take an axe and say, any of you want to leave, we'll pay you till September, don't care what your job is, just get out. That's not the way to do this.
It's not a very qualitative approach, I would agree, but it certainly is a wake-up call of the bloat in government. Government is way too big. Way too big.
It is unless you need it. You know, it is unless your kids developed a disease based upon the pollution in the brook that's running down the backyard here. You don't have any use for the U.S. EPA until you need it, or the Center for Disease Control, unless you need it.
FEMA is an important agency.
Yeah.
Yet FEMA is paying for hotel rooms and quality hotels for illegal migrants in New York City, and yet the rebuilding of North Carolina from the devastating storm out there is not complete, still need resources for that. It's a question of priorities.
There's always been some politician somewhere holding up the $300 toilet or the $275 hammer and say, see, look. Well, that's usually some excuse for a tax cut to say we can find it in the waste. But to go into how about the USAID? All the orange clown has said is it's corrupt and we're just going to get rid of it all. You and I are the children of the World War II generation.
Right.
And since the time we were born in the 1950s, early 1950s, until now, 75 years, Pax Americana, there has not been a world war. The United States took on as its responsibility trying to be a beacon, trying to say that democracy is, look at us. And yes, you need some grain over there in the Congo. You need some help over here in Singapore. The United States of America, the beacon of help with a capitalistic system and a democratically elected people, can show by example that we're here for all of the good things. It's worked.
Here's the problem.
Mainly it's worked.
There is a lot of waste. There is some corruption. All those activities should be under the State Department, not a separate agency. That's what we're heading for.
I don't think that's what we're heading for. I think we're just deciding that while we'll take as immigrants the white Afrikaners from South Africa, you can come here. Anybody that's got any color in their skin, you are not those, give us your tired, you're poor. America's borders are closed down unless you're a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant or you're a smart chemist that we can use. It's not a good place for this country to be. It is not a good place for us to be threatening Greenland and telling Canada we're going to make it a state and renaming the Gulf of Mexico. This is silliness.
Gulf of America. I like it. Sounds great.
How about pennies? They went the way of the Gulf of Mexico yesterday.
Yeah.
Does that mean there won't be anything ever costs $20.42 anymore?
I don't know, but if we raise it to the next nickel.
That's not going to help consumers.
No, it's not at all. Let's talk about the state.
Let's talk about the state.
General Assembly is in session right now.
It is.
And
scary, but true.
There's a couple of things that concern me, not the least of which is reform of property tax. Now, Pat, stay with me here. Back when Governor Daniels was governor, he authored and pushed through the biggest property tax reform we ever saw. Even embedded it into the Constitution.
And we haven't fully recovered from that one yet, but yes, you're right.
It was recovering. It was a necessary thing. It was done, and he did it with a lot of planning and a lot of input from experts. So why are we looking at this issue again? I thought we resolved it 8 years ago.
So that the governor can burnish his tax cut credentials, which is the surest way for people to vote for you, is if you can say, I cut your taxes. Damn the consequences. Let me give you an even better one. When Mike Braun stood and looked into the cameras in a debate for governor, he had Suzanne Crouch on stage with him. Suzanne Crouch said, I believe we should eliminate the state income tax. You remember that campaign? Governor, then Senator Braun's answer was, really? Well, that'll create an $8 billion hole in the state budget. How do you propose, Lieutenant Governor, to fill it? Yet that same blue-shirted Mike Braun, now governor, looks into the camera and says, why, we are going to go back several years and we're going to cap these property taxes, and local governments and schools say, that'll create a billions of dollar hole in the state budget. How are we supposed to fill it?
I've yet to hear the plan to do that.
Well, there's no plan. There's nonsense. It'll cost, I've seen projections, it'll cost our local schools in excess of $20 million right out of the gate. What, do you just start firing teachers? What do you do? You know, this tax cut thing that started all those years ago with the Prop whatever out in California, ever since that time, if anybody says, I'm going to raise your taxes, it's the end of their political career. But you know what? People want the garbage picked up. They want the potholes filled. They expect the fire people to be there in a minute and a half. They expect somebody to pick up the phone when they dial 911. We all depend on government services, and you got to pay for them.
Several years ago, this school corporation had a referendum on raising property taxes for the schools. Mm-hmm. They went out and explained what they were going to do with the money, why we needed it, and it passed overwhelmingly.
Well, the first time it failed 30% to 70%. Then a new superintendent came in, and it passed 70%, 30%.
No, a new approach. The first time, they simply said, trust us. Mm-hmm. The second approach, they explained it. Mm-hmm. I still believe in the voters. If you explain why we're increasing your taxes and how it's related to a vital service, the voters will understand.
Well, I think there's a place for public parks. I think it's good to have libraries. I think you can have a job that pays minimum, well, no, you can't. You can't live if you pay minimum wage, which, Governor Braun, have you thought about that? Indiana's still at $7.50 an hour. That means if you work a 40-hour week, you can't even make a car payment. But in any event, I think there is a reason why we should all be in this together, that park space is important. But it's not free.
Here's the thing. If we're going to talk about cutting taxes, we need to also articulate how we're going to make up that revenue. Also articulate how we're going to make the use of that money, use it more efficiently. Staying with the schools, public schools, I see there's a bill in the Senate or the House, I think there's 2 bills, to interject politics to the election of school board members. How do you feel about that?
I think it's utterly ridiculous. There are still places where school board elections are controlled by the political parties, and they're not successful places. We have a school board that's elected popularly here. The public gets, in our lifetime, it went from appointed, of course, back in, was it late, mid-70s-ish, we went to an elected school board, but we didn't do it with the political parties. And to their credit, both political parties have kind of been hands off. And we've been able to say, this isn't a fundraising race. This is look at their credentials and pick who you want running the place where you send your babies.
Right. The only thing I would change in the system we have now, I think these staggered terms and kind of school board races do not really coincide with general elections. I think we need to tune that up a little bit so the public knows who's on that board, when their term's up, who's running.
I think they run now 3-2-2, right. And then there's everybody has an off year.
It's a little confusing.
That can be fine-tuned,
yeah.
but there's just no reason. Plus, there's more bills to eliminate this and to force schools to do that. It is an effort by and large, in our MAGA legislature, to resegregate the schools. It is a dog whistle, all this talk of vouchers and all this talk of charters. It's simply a way to get white kids and their money into suburban chosen schools and go back to when you and I were growing up, where there was Lincoln High School and Stanley Hall and Wheeler. That's what they're trying to do without really saying it.
I'm not going to get into that because I don't agree with that. But what I do agree is that the money going to private schools, the voucher system, is taking money away from public education, and that's not a good thing.
Public education made this country great. Absolutely, educated, even Jefferson, all of them wrote about the fact that if we're going to have a government that requires the people to elect, they have to have an education.
Right.
They have to have a basic sense of government, some schooling in history and civility and civil, all kinds of things. You teach. It's important that we bring a generation along. All these efforts to defund public education,
Right.
set aside these schools that are not burdened by special education. They're not burdened by English as a second language. They're not burdened by all of the things we dump on public schools, and then we say, why are the public schools failing? Let me disclose, I've been the school lawyer for going toward 40 years now. I'm a little biased, but both of us are graduates of public education from kindergarten through law school.
My comment on that is this. Rather than developing spin-off private educational facilities, let's work to make our public institutions better.
Yeah.
They can always get better.
And we can pay teachers, the most critically important job there is, as much as we pay other government officials, and make that job an attractive one, so the best and brightest go get an education and can't wait to get back here and teach.
And they want to stay there.
Absolutely.
I mean, the days of people being in teaching for 20, 30 years are gone.
It's all, when our mothers were growing up, there were 3 jobs open to women: secretary, teacher, or nurse, unless they got pregnant, because then they couldn't be showing in the workspace. And so teachers had traditionally been a woman's job, and I think that's why the pay is not equivalent to where it should be, frankly. I think it's history. But how do you feel about the elimination? I see we've introduced, while we're talking about the state, a bill to eliminate DEI programs. We've done that by executive order in the federal government, and now the state needs, and the House has even introduced a bill in Indiana about immigration. Now, state governments have nothing to do with immigration, but by God, we'll be there.
I agree that that's going a little overboard, considering what the responsibilities of the state are. However, DEI is just another name for quotas. I mean, here's the thing. We've made our educational institutions equal opportunity. I say hire the best and the brightest, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation. Hire the best and brightest. DEI insinuates quotas. I don't like that.
Well, I don't think it insinuates quotas, and I'm not talking to you. You don't have a discriminatory bone in your body. But I'm talking to the legislature when I say, nobody worried about unequal choices while black people were enslaved. And in our lifetime, we went to high school that was all white. Nobody worried about preference when it was the white people benefiting from that. It's only when there was time to play catch up in about the 1980s, where all of a sudden white people said, oh no one should get a leg up. Now white folks have had a leg up since 1619 in this country, but only when it became to the disadvantage of the white folks, we all sort of said, it all ought to be equal. It all ought to be equal. It all ought to be on merit. Now the fact that the best black athletes in the world couldn't be in the major leagues until the 50s, it wasn't about merit then.
Wait a second, Patrick. You used the term equal about 15 times just now. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm all about, equal. Equal opportunities, not quotas.
We've only worried about equal in the last 10, 20 years when white guys all of a sudden said the white male rule in this country is being challenged. All of a sudden, women are getting these good jobs, and black people are getting these jobs. That's when we started worrying about keeping things equal.
That's a little bit of anecdotal. There's really no evidence to back that up.
Well, how about local? We only got about a minute. I think things are going swimmingly.
The good news is you can now drink in front of your condo.
Well, that would be lovely.
If it passes city council.
I see if that passes city council, you can take a glass full of beer down at one end of Main Street and walk to the other. And you know what? We'll have our own sort of Bourbon Street or whatever. I think that's great.
By the way, there are two bills in the House and Senate right now dealing with marijuana. Mm-hmm. You think we'll ever see marijuana being legalized in this state?
If the legislature would all smoke it together, they'd legalize it in a heartbeat. You know, it's great seeing you, Your Honor. I've been staffing the Southern office for some time now, and it's good being back up here where it's going to be 20 degrees and snow again tonight. It's another reason I need to get back out of town.
Good to see you, Patrick.
Always good to see you and all of you 5 million viewers right here on Shively and Shoulders.